Our big idea is artists create art based on life experiences. And for the instructional guide, we're going to Module 3, Artists Document People and Their Lives. Our art standard is describe how art plays a role in reflecting life, and we're specifically going to be talking about architecture. Natural architecture would be caves, and we can see that in this cave drawing, which is in France, spotted horses on the cave walls, and look at this. The kids get a kick out of this. They put their handprints on it. That was their version of selfies 24,000 years ago. Also, they used their art to communicate. Here, this is an Assyrian wall, which was in ancient Iran, and we see that there's a procession showing the king, but also on these same walls, they show pictures of mighty battles where the Assyrians were conquering their enemies, and they were on the exterior walls. So they were showing people that if they, maybe if they came up to an Assyrian city, they might just want to go ahead and ride on by. So we have that. And I also asked the students, why did they think it was necessary to put that on the outside of the walls? And eventually they do come up with, well, people couldn't read, so they used pictures to communicate. This is our vocabulary for this entire lesson. I start out with form, and first we establish that they know what solids are from math, and I tell them that form is the word we use for solids in art. So, but let's look at some synonyms for form. First of all, we've got solids, but then we want to look at something else. Do they know what 3D is? And they all laugh because, yes, it's movies and funky glasses. But I explained that actually, when something is two-dimensional, 2D, it means that it's flat. There are only two dimensions to measure. So we look at the card and I say, well, we can measure it this way and this way. That's 2. But there's nothing to measure here. Then we look at the crayon box and we go, we can measure it here, we can measure it across, and we can measure the thickness. So we've got length, width, and depth. That's 3 dimensions, and that's what 3D means. It means it's not flat. Then I go ahead and go to parallel, because that's certainly one of the key ideas that we have when we're drawing geometric forms. And I ask them, I say, okay, show me with your arms what is parallel. And we see a few arms and stuff, but most of the time, then they look around and they see what everybody else is doing, and they either put their arms up in the shape of an 11 or across like an equal sign. And we talk about the word parallel and how to remember that. I have them write parallel on their art paper at the top, and we circle the 2 L's in parallel to remind us that that means 2 lines are the same distance apart all the way down, and I remind them that since they started writing, they've been writing on parallel lines, and I think they get it from that. So, the rest of these we'll be getting to as we go through the lesson. Now, our objective is to learn to draw and see forms in architecture so that we can document people's lives. So let's start looking for some forms in architecture, but first, let's look at the artists themselves, the architects. This is certainly one of the best-known buildings in the country. It's, of course, in Los Angeles. It's the Disney Concert Hall, designed by Frank Gehry. And it's really interesting how he works. First, he decides how the inside should be worked because people are going to be using it. So he has to know who are the people, what are they using it for, what kind of movement do they need, and what kind of spaces. And Frank Gehry actually works with wooden blocks for his rooms and his halls, just like they did when they were little children. So he stacks up the blocks and he gets his rooms and everything, the spaces where he wants them. And then once he gets that done, so it's right for the people and right what they're using it for, then he goes ahead and he designs the outside. He starts sketching, he starts designing the outside of the building. Here's an example. This is Frank Gehry, and this, it looks like he's wrapped a package. This is actually a hotel for a winery in Valencia, Spain. Now, we want to look at some other architects and some other architecture and try and identify the forms that we see. So here's Björk Ingels, he's Danish, and here's the Wren building that he designed for Shanghai. And the reason it's called the Wren building is because it's shaped like the Chinese character Ren, which is the character for person. And if we look at it, I cover the bottom part of it and I ask them, okay, which form do you see? Yes, they can tell me a rectangular prism. But look what he's done. He's taken the rectangular prism and instead of drawing it straight down, he's split it and he's drawing it out. And we can see exactly how that's done. I take two rectangular prisms and we can tape them together at the top so they're like the building. And then all we have to do is bend them. This way the students can really see what we're talking about, because we did start with rectangular prisms and we can see that building. So if we were drawing it out so that we could see it easily, here's the character Wren, and here's what the two rectangular prisms would look like. They're just bent. Then we look at Augustine Hernandez, one of his residences that he's designed in Mexico City. And here he is. And I asked him, okay, which forms do you see? Well, certainly they see cylinders, and then they see the hemisphere, which we also call a dome in architecture. And if they're really interested, I point out that what he's done in this home is instead of curtains, he's actually has water flowing down the windows all the time to provide the same use as a curtain would have. And then we look at the pyramid. We don't see a lot of pyramids in architecture because it's much more expensive to build a pyramid, but we do see them in lightweight structures. Of course, they know the ancient pyramids in Egypt. But here, I've shown how this architect, Daniel Libeskind, has used the pyramid, and he's inverted it. He's turned it upside down. He's turned them sideways to use in the museum in Ontario, Canada. Then we look at this one. This one, they're kind of stumped by at first sometimes. I said, well, what do you see? And they don't know. But if I cover this and say, okay, now what shape do you see here? Or what form do you see here? Then they'll come up with cone. So what's been done here is we've got one cone on the bottom. We have a cone turned upside down on the top. And this is the BMW Delivery Center in Munich, Germany. Then, this is in Spain, and it's Santiago Calatrava's design for the theater in the City of Science and Industry, which is actually a children's museum in Spain. And we can see here that this is a sphere. This is a reflecting pool, so we only have half a sphere. So I asked them if they know the word for half a sphere. No. So we learned the word hemisphere. Then, now that we've looked at the different geometric forms, then we're going to start to draw. So, we're going to start. They've already got parallel written on their paper, and I remind them again about parallel lines because they're so important in drawing so many of these. And we're going to circle the word parallel. And back off a little bit. Now, when we're drawing, we're going to draw the shape first, and then we're going to look at the different forms that are associated with it. So if I want to make a rectangle, and I ask them, look around the room. What is the most common shape that you see? Which shape do you see the most of? And finally they come up with rectangle, and then they're amazed at how everything's rectangular. So to draw a rectangle, we make two parallel lines, and then we make another set of parallel lines, and we have a really nice rectangle. So now we want to look at how to draw a rectangular prism. So we construct another rectangle, making sure that the lines are parallel, and I do remind them that the more they do this, the easier it'll become. Then I also tell them there are lots of ways to draw a rectangular prism. I'm going to show them one that gives them the best results in my experience. And what we want to do is, first of all, how many faces of a rectangle can we see at one time? And if they're not sure, I have them pick up their box or a book and look and see how many faces can we see. Well, we can see 3. That's the most we can see at a time. So are the edges, all the edges parallel to each other? Yes. Okay. So we can start at the top. It doesn't matter which one. We're going to make a line that's too long. Make a parallel line that's too long. I do that so that when we cross, they won't just draw to the ends of the line. Now we want to make one on either side. We have a little more space on this side. Let's use this side. And then we've got the sides parallel. Then we're going to connect the corners. Now we have a diagonal line. We want this line and this line to be parallel to this one. So we're going to do this, move down, and just keep doing that. Do it again, move over here, there. Then we can just erase the extra bits of line. And we have a rectangular prism. Now, what I do now is I want them to practice drawing rectangular prisms. So I tell them that they need to draw 5 rectangular prisms on their paper, and that gives me a chance to go around and see who's struggling and who needs a little bit of help and who's having a hard time seeing parallel. And once they get their 5 drawn, we're fine. Then I ask them, okay, can you think of another form that if we look at it straight on, where we can't see the top and the bottom, would actually look like a rectangle? So that confuses them a little bit. And then I say, okay, what about this? If we look straight on at this, it's a rectangle around it. What is it? Okay, everybody gets it. It's a cylinder. And like a rectangle, it's got parallel sides. And look at this. This and this have the same curve also. Now, for drawing a cylinder, we know that if we draw it this way, we've got an ellipse. We've still got an ellipse. Now we're starting to get an oval. And finally, if we look straight down into it, we have a circle. So to help them just get started so they don't make that oval too big, I have them do this. First things first, we're going to make an 11 to draw our cylinder, and then we're going to go happy line, sad line. That will give a more effective cylinder generally for them, because that way I can show them this line and this line are the same curve. Now, remember what we did with the rectangles when we made the rim design? Well, we could certainly bend our cylinder also, couldn't we? So let's take a look at how we would bend our cylinder. Well, we could do this. We could make it like a C and then make a line that's the same distance from it, and then we can just make like parentheses on the ends that touch each other. And we have macaroni. So what could we do with this? Well, we could take this form and put it against this form, and we'd have a mug. So we start talking about the different things we could do. And then we're going to also look at what would a half of a rectangular prism look like, because we use those too. So I show them that if we took this and we just had half of it, what would we have? A triangular prism, of course. So let's take a look at that really quickly. And how would we use that in architecture? Well, if we took a triangular prism, which would look pretty much like this. There's a triangular prism. If we take the triangular prism and we put it on top of the rectangular prism, what have we got? Oh, we have a little building. So we put different parts together to create architecture. Now, let's see, we use the rectangle. Now, let's go for a triangle. There's our triangle. Now, which forms do we associate with a triangle? Well, of course, we already did the triangular prism. And then they come up with pyramid. So we say, okay, how can we draw a pyramid? Well, we're going to draw another triangle. And we'll just make one leg shorter and connect it with a straight line. We have a pyramid. And then they've already caught on when I turn the square into the cylinder. So now they're up for it. They go, okay, a cone. So we look at it and we say, okay, we can draw part of the triangle, but with a cone, it's a rounded surface. So we're going to draw a rounded line. So they go, oh, we can do happy line, sad line again. And there's a cone. Now we can turn it upside down. Like a traffic cone. And traffic cones generally are open at the top. So happy line, sad line. This would be it's just the same as the cylinder. We're only using lines that are not parallel. And then we say, well, we could put one of these on it. What would we have? Well, we'd have a megaphone. So now they're beginning to see more and more what we're doing. And then I say, well, what about architecture? Well, let's see. What if I shortened this and I put a cone on top? Now, I wouldn't see this line, but look what would happen here. Could this be like a building? Yes, there are lots of places in the world where they use grass thatched roofs and cylindrical houses. Especially many of the African villages are made of homes that look just like that. Then, after we go through talking about these things and how else they can see, then we're ready to go to the circle. So now, oops, something's under there. Now we're going to go to the circle. How can we make a circle look three-dimensional? It doesn't have sides. So I go back and I say, remember, we use straight lines where things are flat. But where things were curved, we used curved lines. The surface of the rectangular prism, all flat. So we're using straight lines. The surface of the cylinder, curved, so we use curved lines. Same with this part. So if I were putting lines on here, if I were making this striped, I would curve the lines so that it would definitely continue to look curved. However, if I were putting bricks on here, I would use straight lines because it's got flat sides, and that's the one thing I want them to understand, because if they really think about it, flat means straight lines, rounded means use curved lines, and that's a big thing for them when they're drawing. So we draw another circle. Ooh. And if I put a curved line on it, like an equator, it's going to look three-dimensional. Same thing, I could do this and get my circle, and then I could just put curved lines on it going this way. Kind of missed there. And we have a ball, so they can understand that we use curved lines. Then I go ahead and show this and ask them if they know the name. What is the name? What do we call a half circle? And generally, that's a new word for them. So we write it, semicircle. Then I ask them if they remember the residence I showed them with the cylinders in Mexico City and what was on top of it. And so we use a half circle, and we can use just a curved line, and we call it a hemisphere. So we've got a hemisphere, which is also known as a dome in architecture. So we write dome. And then we look at what else we have in life. If we do happy line, sad line on it, we have a bowl. We could also take this, do that, and we have a cap. So now they're getting into it. We really, really want them to see forms when they look at things. So at this point, I tell them that we're going to split into groups, and we're all going to draw. The first thing I do, though, is I give everyone a bead. And that will take some time, and I tell them to flip their paper over and draw their bead. Draw it from different angles. Draw it a few times and let them work, because this side on mine is flatter. This is more rounded. So they're looking. Then I ask them, how are you going to show people that the bead has form? And then they see in the wood there are light lines. So all they can do is they can go ahead and draw those lines in, and that will give it form. Now, while they're doing that, each table becomes a drawing group. And I have certain things that I have them draw, and I just rotate the items from the group. So each group has a chance to talk about and draw each item. For instance, I've got the funnel, And their group would have to identify which forms. Okay, this part's a cylinder. This part is a cone. This part is also a cone. So they're going to draw it either this way or this way. So they're going to have to show an opening either in this side or this side. So we've got the funnel. Then I have the little toothpick holder, which is the bunny rabbit in the hat. And we have a cylinder. We have a disc-shaped cylinder. We've got the hemisphere and the little ears. And then the group talks about it, and then everybody draws it. So that's another one. Another one that's been really good is the light bulb, because we know we see a sphere here, and we see right here, we see our cylinder, we see a cone on top, and then our cylinder fans out just like the Wren building did to go across and around the hemisphere. So that's another one that the group works on. This one I have them work on. I say, what do you see? Well, we see cones, but the sides are a little bit curved. Well, that's okay. Just draw it that way. And then the rectangular prism here. And then look down here. There's a little pyramid right down here. So then they all draw this. And I do suggest that they leave the pyramid at the bottom. And then I want them to draw as many rectangular prisms as possible, so I give them this little box, and then they can draw the lines going around it too. And see that here we have crescent shape here, and they can draw this. The last one I do is the cylinder, and I have them put the basketball right on top of the cylinder, so that I know they're going to be drawing the curved lines. I don't want them to try and draw all this at the top. That's not going to work very well when we're just beginning. And that is our fourth grade, the first part of our fourth grade lessons on forms.